The rain had already soaked through his jacket by the time she said it. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet, almost embarrassed voice that seemed to disappear into the hum of the cafe. She looked down at her hands, fingers nervously wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched, and whispered that she couldn't afford the date. In that moment, everything seemed to pause, the clinking of spoons, the distant chatter, even the rain tapping against the windows, as if the world itself was waiting to see what he would do next. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of human connection, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to The Kindness Chronicles. Stories like this remind us that even the smallest actions can change lives forever. He hadn't expected that answer. Daniel had spent the entire afternoon preparing for this evening, carefully choosing a place that wasn't too expensive but still felt warm and welcoming. As a single father, every dollar mattered. Every decision had weight. But this wasn't just another night out, it was his first date in nearly 3 years, since life had shifted in ways he never imagined. Raising his 6-year-old daughter alone had reshaped him. It had softened him in some ways and hardened him in others. There were days when he felt like he was barely holding things together, juggling work, school pickups, grocery lists, bedtime stories, and the constant quiet fear that he wasn't doing enough. Yet through it all, his daughter, Lily, had been his anchor. Her laughter filled the spaces where loneliness tried to creep in, and her tiny hand in his reminded him why he kept going. When he met Sarah online, it felt different. She wasn't flashy or overly confident. She didn't try to impress him with perfection. Instead, she spoke honestly, about her work, her struggles, her hopes. She had a warmth that felt real, like someone who understood what it meant to carry invisible burdens. They had talked for weeks before deciding to meet, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel allowed himself to hope. But now, sitting across from her, hearing her confess that she couldn't afford the date, he realized this wasn't just about money. There was something deeper in her voice, something fragile, something that sounded like years of disappointment and quiet sacrifices. She explained, slowly and hesitantly, that things had been difficult. Her job hours had been cut, bills had piled up, and she had almost canceled tonight. She didn't want him to think she was irresponsible or unreliable. She just didn't want to start something with a lie. Daniel listened, really listened. And in her words, he heard echoes of his own life, the nights of worrying about rent, the times he skipped meals so Lily could have a little extra, the silent calculations behind every purchase. He understood what it felt like to stand on the edge of dignity and desperation, trying to hold on to both. For a moment, he considered the simplest response. He could reassure her, insist on paying, brush it off as no big deal. That would have been easy. Expected, even. But something in her expression stopped him. It wasn't just about the bill. It was about pride, about being seen as more than a problem to be solved. So instead, he did something unexpected. He smiled, not a pitying smile, but a genuine one, and suggested they leave. At first, she looked confused, even hurt, as if she thought he was rejecting her. But he gently explained that maybe they didn't need a cafe or a check to share an evening. Maybe they could just walk. The rain had softened into a drizzle by the time they stepped outside. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, turning ordinary streets into something almost magical. They walked side by side, not rushing, not forcing conversation, just letting the silence settle comfortably between them. As they wandered, they began to talk again. Not about surface-level things, but about life. Real life. Sarah shared how she had been supporting her younger brother after their parents passed away, how she had put her own dreams on hold to make sure he finished school. She spoke of the exhaustion, the quiet resilience it took to keep going when no one was watching. Daniel told her about Lily, about how she loved drawing, how she insisted on bedtime stories every night even if he came home late, how she believed her dad could fix anything in the world. He admitted that he didn't always feel as strong as she thought he was. The conversation flowed naturally, deepening with every step. There was no pressure, no pretense. Just two people sharing pieces of their lives, discovering that their struggles didn't make them broken, they made them human. At one point, they stopped near a small street vendor selling tea. Daniel bought 2 cups, insisting this time, but in a way that felt casual, not burdensome. They stood there, sipping the warm, simple drink, and for the first time that evening, Sarah laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh that seemed to lift something heavy from her shoulders. In that moment, Daniel realized something important. This wasn't about impressing someone or creating a perfect night. It was about connection. About showing up as you are, flaws and all, and being accepted anyway. As the night went on, he made a decision that would quietly change everything. He told Sarah about a small idea he had been considering for a while, a community project where people could exchange skills instead of money. Babysitting in exchange for tutoring, cooking in exchange for repairs, simple acts of support that didn't rely on cash but on trust and kindness. It was something he had never pursued seriously, thinking it was too idealistic, too impractical. But now, hearing her story, seeing her strength, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Sarah's eyes lit up as he spoke. She began adding her own ideas, suggesting ways it could work, how people in difficult situations could help each other without feeling ashamed. The energy between them shifted, turning into something hopeful, something alive. What started as an awkward confession had transformed into a shared vision. Over the next few weeks, they kept meeting, not in expensive places, but in parks, libraries, and quiet corners of the city. They brought Lily along sometimes, and Sarah quickly formed a bond with her, treating her with a gentle kindness that made Daniel's heart ache in the best way. Together, they started building the idea into reality. It wasn't easy. There were doubts, setbacks, and moments when it felt like no one would care. But they persisted, fueled by the belief that even small acts of kindness could ripple outward. Slowly, people began to notice. A neighbor offered free sewing lessons in exchange for help with groceries. A retired teacher volunteered to tutor children whose parents couldn't afford extra classes. A mechanic fixed a single mother's car in return for home-cooked meals. The project grew, not because of money, but because of trust. And at the center of it all were 2 people who had once sat across from each other in a cafe, unsure of what would happen next. For Daniel, the biggest change wasn't just the project, it was the feeling that he wasn't alone anymore. Sarah understood the weight he carried, and instead of trying to take it away, she stood beside him, helping him carry it. For Sarah, it was a chance to see herself not as someone struggling to survive, but as someone capable of creating change. Months later, on a quiet evening, they returned to the same cafe where it had all begun. This time, there was no hesitation, no awkwardness. Just a quiet sense of gratitude. They ordered the same drinks, sat at the same table, and shared a smile that held everything they had been through. What Daniel did that night wasn't grand or dramatic. He didn't solve all of Sarah's problems or sweep her into a perfect life. He simply chose kindness. He chose to see her, to respect her, to meet her where she was. And in doing so, he changed not just one evening, but the course of 2 lives, and many others who would be touched by their journey. As this story comes to an end, if it touched your heart in any way, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to The Kindness Chronicles. Your support helps keep stories like this alive, spreading hope and reminding people that kindness still exists in the world.